Master, Center for Infinite Growth. I'm also a psychic counselor, and I have a lot of background in Edgar Cayce. This is my friend and associate, Dr. Larry Rouse, PhD, who is a clinical psychologist, who is psychologically oriented and climbing more out on a limb, getting into the realm of parapsychology as I swing more into the realm of psychology. We find our paths crossing, and here we are. I'm just waiting to see for any late arrivals. Perhaps we should begin. Can we start with an overview of what we're going to cover today?
Yes, Lynn and I thought that this would be an appropriate day to talk about love, and also to connect it with our past lives and reincarnation. Valentine's Day is a day in which we all recall and bring forth that concept and manifestation of love. So today we're going to combine two viewpoints, often viewed as divergent, but we're going to make them complementary. I'm going to be looking at love from the here and now viewpoint in terms of interpersonal relationships and the kinds of relationships that we experience, love or lack of love, in this particular lifetime. And Lynn is going to give a trans-historical perspective, that is, perspective in terms of a much greater viewpoint than I'm possibly able to give. And so...
what I'd like, and we're Jill, to take a seat. Now that we've introduced ourselves, I think it might be helpful if you introduced yourselves to us. So, starting in the back of the room, going row by row, I'd like you to tell us your name, your astrological sun sign, and just a word or two about what draws you here today. Starting with you.
Excuse me, is there anyone that does not wish to be videotaped before we continue with this?
Okay.
Do you want me to go to the back there?
Oh, yeah.
Go to the back of the class.
Adele, we were asking, we had introduced ourselves briefly and what we plan to talk about, and we're wondering if you could begin by introducing yourself since you're in the back of the room. Tell us your name, sun sign, and what draws you here in a word or two today.
Okay. My name is Adele St. John, and Virgo is my sun sign. And I think I was drawn here today because I'm interested in, I think, what everybody else is interested in. That's being able to love more freely and being able to be loved more freely. And a word or two about today. That's what you wanted me to say.
Okay, great. Michael?
I'm Michael Collins. I'm a Cancer. I think Lynn drew me here today, but there are events going on in my life that I feel this is immediately applicable to.
Great.
I'm Marvian Chan, and my sun sign is Gemini, and I've been drawn to this seminar for the past life correlation involved in love relationships to have a better understanding why they function the way they do.
My name is Karen Emmons. I'm a Cancer, and I'm just here for more information.
Okay. Should we go like this way?
Okay. I'm Minnie Hewitt, and my sign is Pisces, and my sister Nona wanted me to come, so
Here you are.
here I am.
Okay. Nona?
Well, I'm the sister Nona. And my husband and I really came here together to find out when we had been associated with one another in past lives, because we know we have been.
I'm Paul Roth, I'm a Cancer.
Oh, I'm a Leo, I'm sorry.
Oh.
And I came along with my wife.
I can tell by the way you two compliment each other that you could be twin souls. You feel right in for each other. Okay,
I'm Rick Dole.
oh, I think we missed Rose.
I'm Gloria Rapatoni, and I'm a Pisces, and I'm here to find out how I've gotten this far and how I'm going to get ahead in respect to relationships and love, and what the past life significance of my life so far has been.
I'm Jerry Uzzetti. I'm a Libra. I'm here for self-understanding.
I'm Judy Solomon. I'm an Aries, and I guess I'm here to better understand some past relationships and just understand some changes I've made recently.
I'm Chris Storman, and I'm a Virgo, and That's pretty much what everybody else said. I'm here to better understand myself and then find out about some past relationships I've had.
I'm Rick Dole, and I'm a Scorpio, and I'm here to spirit guided.
Very good. Okay. Let's see, starting over here.
Okay, my name is Elizabeth Dupreez. I'm a sun sign Cancer. I came here because Phil invited me, and I had absolutely no resistance to it at all. I love love, because the more I give, the more I'm able to receive.
I'm Phil Ross. I came because Lynn invited me. I'm a Leo.
I'm John Ogler, and I've always been interested in the metaphysical world. I feel that I have a lot to learn about it. I haven't been studying as much as I feel I need to. I don't think I mentioned I'm a Libra, and I think Libras have a lot to learn about relationships.
They're the sign of relationships.
Yeah, right. And Monday night I was thinking real seriously about a relationship that I'm having trouble with, and about that time I got a phone call about this class, so I thought, that's good. So here I am.
I'm Nancy Witt, and I'm an Aries, and I too was guided by spirit.
Hi, I'm Louise. I'm a Virgo, and I'm told to give and receive love.
I'm Cheryl Jackson. I'm a Libra, and I've been drawn here for several reasons. One for spiritual growth, one because Lynn invited me, and also because I'm going through some trying times right now with a relationship, trying to understand it.
I'm Cheryl Hogue. I'm a Capricorn, and I have a relationship that's difficult that I'm trying to gain some understanding about.
Okay. Few more guests. What might be interesting to talk about for just a moment is a little bit about the 12 initiations of love astrologically. You've all announced your sun sign. This is going by sun sign. Looking at each of the signs in progression, each sign has a quality that they can teach and another quality that they're struggling to learn. When the understanding of the second quality equals the first, he or she has achieved mastery of a particular astrological sun sign lesson. Do you want to? Okay, go ahead.
2 chairs here.
That one is probably not the good place to sit. No? No, I don't think so.
Excuse me, I'll sit.
Okay, so it's okay. It's okay? Okay. So are you.
Maybe a break will adjourn to the larger room.
We would. Can the new people just come and introduce themselves with their name and their sun sign and just a word or two on what drew you here today?
My name is Tammy, Leo. Learning more.
Linda, Scorpio, and ditto, learning more.
Mary, Cancer. A review.
Okay. Okay, so we're going to push light.
I'm Joe Haddox.
Oh.
I'm a Pisces, and Lynn's husband.
You can leave that unlocked.
Oh,
okay.
Lynn, I have a question.
Yeah.
Could you and Larry introduce yourselves and your sun signs? I know yours, but I don't know Larry's.
We're Scorpio.
I'm a Virgo. We introduced ourselves, we didn't tell you our sun sign.
Thank you.
Okay, astrologically, as I mentioned, each sign has its lesson that it must learn and its lesson that it can teach. Aries, if we liken a human being's lifetime to the astrological wheel, starting with Aries as infancy and ending with Pisces as full understanding of maturity, I'm not saying that an Aries is infantile, or Pisces is also wise, but this is more of a way of hooking on a connection to it. With Aries, the infant who says, I am, Aries can teach that love is innocence, but must learn that love is trust. Taurus, the baby, says, I have, and can teach that love is patience, but must learn that love is forgiveness. Gemini, the child, says, I think, and can teach that love is awareness, but must learn that love is feeling. Cancer, the adolescent, says, I feel, and can teach that love is devotion, but must learn that love is freedom. Leo, the teenager, says, I will, and can teach that love is ecstasy, but must learn that love is humility. Virgo, the adult, says, I analyze, and can teach that love is pure, but must accept that love is fulfillment. Libra represents the stage in life of marriage or partnership with others. Libra says, I balance, and can teach that love is beauty, but must learn that love is harmony. Scorpio relates to sex and says, I desire, can teach that love is passion, but must learn that love is surrender to higher energies also. Sagittarius is knowledge, and they say, I see. They can teach that love is honesty, but must learn that love is loyalty. Capricorn is experience and says, I use. They can teach that love is wisdom, but must learn that love is unselfish. Aquarius is idealism and says, I know. They can teach that love is tolerance, but must learn that love is oneness. Pisces is submission to fate, and they can say, I believe. They can teach that love is compassion, but they must learn that love is all. Touching a little bit more on the astrological types. In Aries, a fire element sign, its positive qualities are wonder, raw courage, blind faith, and initiative. Its negative qualities include selfish egotism, aggressiveness, impulsive action without regard for consequences. For Aries, love is a necessity of life, but often taken for granted. Aries can demand love and needs to be reminded that in the winter times of difficulties with love, that there will be a spring where love renews itself. Taurus is an earth element. Its positive qualities are strength of purpose, patience, steadfastness, and conviction. Its negative qualities can be obstinacy, blind prejudice, and stubbornness. It experiences love often in physical affection, accepting and returning love with the senses, glorying in it with uncomplicated appreciation. Taurus can sometimes be a bit possessive and often very loyal. Gemini is an air element. Its positive qualities are versatility, mental alertness, flexibility, and quickness of perception. Its negative qualities can include restlessness, glibness, shallowness, double talk, and unreliability. This doesn't sound very flattering, does it? For the Gemini, love is enjoyable but sometimes restrictive. Geminis need love, but they can discard it rashly when it's a barrier to freedom and then find themselves a little bit lost, missing that one that they need. Cancer is a water element. Its positive qualities include imagination, tenacity, tenderness, sensitivity, care, and caution. Its negative qualities can include irritability, melancholy, clinginess, moodiness, crabbiness, because Cancer is the crab. For Cancer, love is home, emotional security, and the need for love may be hidden behind lunar laughter and tears. With Leo, a fire element, the positive qualities include nobility, strength, leadership, and protective charisma. The negative qualities of Leo can be arrogance, false pride, vanity, and tyranny. Every sign has its light and its shadow, as you'll notice, as do we all. Love for the Leo is romance. The Leo is often in love and with him or herself sometimes. The Leo needs to learn the beauty of sacrifice of the self. Virgo, an earth element, enjoys clarity of thought. I'm a Virgo, so I'll say very good things about this. Discrimination, service, self-honesty. I had trouble finding the fault. No. The negative qualities can be criticism, pessimism, hair-splitting, self-deprecation, worry. And for the Virgo, love can be purity, and Virgo often fears and mistrusts the very thing that they desire the most. Virgo also has Vulcan's fires simmering beneath the surface of this moral reserve. Libra is an air. You laugh.
My moon's in Virgo.
Is it? You can identify that?
Oh, yeah. My moon's being the dominant sun sign Cancer and then having my moon in Virgo, it's in my 12th house.
That's where you hide out, in the 12th house. Libra is an air element. Its positive qualities include justice, intelligence, charm, and gentleness. Its negative qualities can be indecision, pleasure-seeking, and temperament. Love for a Libra, we have some Libras here naturally, it's a workshop on relationships, is mating of minds and hearts, balance. Sometimes a Libra can be infatuated with love's surface beauty. Scorpio is a water element. Its positive qualities include loyalty, willpower, magnetism, insight, and self-control. Its negative qualities can be ruthlessness, self-hatred, and suspicion, sometimes even revenge. Scorpio has a sting, as some of you may know. For Scorpio, love is a consuming flame, leading hope ultimately to the purification of desires. Sagittarius is a fire element. Its positive qualities are optimism, candor, enthusiasm, cheerfulness, and daring. Its negative qualities include recklessness, carelessness, rudeness, and fickleness. Love for the Sagittarian is idealism and challenge and adventure. And sometimes Sagittarius needs not to be so adventurous, to be a little more loyal. For Capricorn, which is an earth element, positive qualities are determination, wisdom, endurance, profundity, and dependability. Oftentimes the Capricorn person has had to really pull him or herself up by their own bootstraps and has had to really fight their way to what they have in life. And so there's a certain fear of rejection with the Capricorn also. So they need to avoid severity, narrowness, rigidity, depression, and loneliness. Love for the Capricorn is sincere, may be slow to awaken because of dreading rejection, but will be constant and challenging. Aquarius is an air element. Its positive qualities include vision, individuality, tolerance, and friendliness. Oftentimes an Aquarian is really good at loving people in the world as a whole and saving the whales, but somewhat poor at loving the people in the house. So its negative qualities can include eccentricity, detachment, absent-mindedness, and extremism. Love for the Aquarian is a detached and unselfish emotion to be explored and enjoyed. In Pisces, a water element, positive qualities are humility, compassion, sensitivity, spiritual awareness, and healing potential. The negative qualities include escapism, weakness of will, idleness, and self-deception. Love for the Pisces is a submission of the ego, sometimes to the desires of the other person. Pisces are very empathetic. Sometimes Pisces want to avoid love's pain, seeking only love's pleasure. But Pisces, above all the signs, is capable of glimpsing the soul's love of mind, heart, and spirit united. One last thing, astrology. If you're wanting to, if you have a partner who is an Aries, it's important to try to catch them on the spur of the moment when their fiery enthusiasm and passionate ardor are at peak. In dealing with a Taurus, patience is the key word. It may take time for their emotions to unfold, but then they're very loyal, and it's very hard for a Taurian to break themselves out of a relationship. It's very difficult for them to do. Cancers are best won with home cooking, but they may cling like the crab once caught. With a Leo partner, it's important to make sure that person sometimes holds the spotlight, and then the lion will purr and be extremely generous. With Virgo, this intellectual, analytical zodiac species can find it difficult to express emotion, but prove your integrity and loyalty. There are many tests to pass before Virgo goes in. I don't like that. With Libra, if you have a Libra partner, it's important not to be too harsh, too blunt. They want to feel wanted, and they also like an ambiance of beauty and the aesthetic grace of life because they're Venus ruled. Whatever you do with a Scorpio, don't play games. Watch out. Scorpio emotions are probably the most intense of the zodiac and are just not to be tampered with. It's not easy to turn on a Scorpio, but if you do, make sure that you know what you're getting into. Sagittarius, complete freedom is the keynote of dealing with this restless species. If you never question their actions and let them feel free, you have the secret formula for longevity. Capricorns trade heavily in the traditional descriptions on tradition, and if you can be an asset to the Capricorn success, that's helpful. Aquarius often knows it all. Don't try to prove them wrong. If you can adjust to the unpredictable, you'll do well with Aquarius. With Pisces, finally, take it slow and easy. The Piscean is the incurable romantic. Sentiment and idealisms are the key to the Pisces, and it's very important with the Pisces to remain the illusion of beauty and gentleness and romance. So that gives you a little bit of a glimpse as to your own astrological nature, perhaps, and that of the partner. Larry?
I'd like to touch upon some issues related to our development and the kind of relationships that we seem to be drawn to. If you think about it, if you can, think about all the different kinds of relationships that you've experienced in this lifetime that you're familiar with. And look and see if you come across a pattern. Is there some similarity to the kinds of people that you're drawn to? Do they fit some kind of similarity? Even when it's not, doesn't work out, is the next person not unlike the person that it did not work out with? Why do we choose, out of all the thousands of people that we could possibly select, why do we choose the person that we choose? What is the basis for that choice, selection? These are some of the aspects of love, connection, that Lynn may touch upon in terms of past lives. But in terms of this life, I think that you can find that we're drawn probably based on some very early images of our first real partner, our parents. And maybe our grandparents is a very powerful force as an image of the kind of type that we're drawn to. And then from there on, it may not even be conscious. It's just something that happens when you see somebody. When you think about the way you met somebody, the first impression may be something in which you are absolutely repelled by that person on the first encounter. And then after another encounter, it's something entirely different. A bonding begins to take place. So I can speak for myself, but I think you can also identify, and that is, what are the patterns of the kind of people that we're drawn to into love, into a love connection in this life? And I'd like each of you just to take a moment to do that kind of inventory in terms of patterns in your life, in terms of the relationships that you've been drawn to that are really significant, in which you form a real significant other relationship. It may last for 20 years. It may have lasted for a night. It may have become totally unfinished. Even if you're not with that person, there's still a powerful bonding, a connection, and it's unfinished, incomplete. Through all the seasons of your life, and all the encounters that you've had, and I'm speaking also for myself, what are the kinds of persons, the types of persons that you seem to be drawn to? It's interesting that we use the phrase falling in love. We don't often use the phrase choosing love. So it's a very powerful metaphysical force that draws us to somebody, as if in some mysterious and not very explainable way, our life is partially incomplete until we meet this other. And then suddenly we feel a kind of, at least for the moment, connection. And I think most of the problems that we have with love are because we're dealing with somebody so close, who is so much a part of our completion, that to manage that love, to keep that love alive, to keep that a duet and not a duel, is a real challenging thing because we are that close. And we can't, at least the rules are, control that other half of us like we'd like to. And so here we are drawn to somebody so mysteriously, as if in deja vu sense we've known them from somewhere long ago, as if in those few moments we've experienced them for a whole lifetime and lifetime. And that sudden moment of recognition is something very, very profound and powerful, from which all the ballads of love are expressed. And that is a very powerful connection that isn't easily managed. It's not as easy as it's not easy to manage yourself, yet alone our significant other. And so we probably also experience the other side of love, which is the shadow, the trying moments, the clashes of will, the miscommunications, on and on. If it's not happening to us, we read about it in the papers. The eruptions of emotions, violence, etc. Breaking up, making up. So all of this keeping love alive is something to do with a very, very powerful thing, and that is we've met somebody who is not easily explained, but a very important fulfillment of what it is to be complete and totally functioning in this world. So if you can just feel that for a moment, that inventory of your own patterns, the patterns of who you meet in your life, I think it will be important for us in this workshop today.
It might be interesting if people shared some of the patterns that they sense.
Would anyone feel uncomfortable sharing a pattern or patterns of the love connections in your life?
Well, this is probably not relationship. Well, yes, it would be. A lot of alcoholics, both within my family and in my relationships. One that a gentleman that I kept company with for a while, whom I learned was an alcoholic. Another one I knew prior to him becoming an alcoholic, and then again forming a relationship with him after he joined AA. So I notice a lot of them.
So you feel that one characteristic of important people, significant others, is that they are also members of AA.
Yes, and I think perhaps it depended upon me, maybe, so that I can keep a relative control of the relationship.
Do you feel comfortable in the top dog role?
No, I never liked it. I felt, I was searching more for a happy medium, if you will.
Then let me ask you the other side of the coin. If you met a very powerful and independent and not dependent man, would you really allow him into your life?
Oh, there'd be a big fight, yes. Yes, exactly. So, as you were talking, a lot of this just kind of clicked in, click, 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 click.
So again, we may be deselecting or not allowing into our lives the kind of people that we say, if only I met Mr. Independent, why do I meet Mr. Dependent, who seems to drain me of my energy? And there is a deeper reason that that's important if you want to make a choice to change about the kind of people that come into your home, into your house, into your attic, into your heart, into your soul, into your being.
Anyone else?
I tend to let a male partner take seniority in my life, like not necessarily. I become the little servant geisha girl or something.
Can you comment on that?
It says, if all this love that I want to share is poured out in many ways, and then the other person disrespects me and thinks that's something that I just should give all the time anyway.
Later we're going to talk about the Wendy Peter Pan syndrome, and there is a tendency, I think, in our recent enculturation as women, there's a tendency to maybe not have our needs for nurturing met early on and to get in the role of the nurturer there's one book that's quite good, Women Who, What Do Women Want? What Do Women Want? I really recommend it. It says that oftentimes in recent cultures, a male may have from the cradle to the grave an uninterrupted stream of female nurturing. You know, do you want something to eat? Are you okay? And girls very early, little girls need that sense of being nurtured and fed. And sometimes they see their mothers giving out but not getting. And so I think it's part of what I hope are changing roles, gender roles, getting less locked into these old gender roles. That we'll see a time when children experience nurturing from male and female parents in early life, and this falling into this role won't be quite as automatic.
Well, I seem to be happiest when I just get out of a relationship entirely and just do my own thing, and if something happens to come along, I may be interested. It's just that sometimes I just lose so much of myself into some sort of relationship. But I think it has a lot to do with my birth and, other things. I wasn't nurtured for like 2.5 months.
If you somewhere missed that nurturing.
Didn't get it. Yeah.
Now, when you find yourself drawn to people in which you play out a role such as the geisha the geisha script.
It's a new one.
The geisha script, does that really meet your needs?
I guess there's a part of me, being a Cancer, that really likes to serve, and also the Moon in Virgo. It's like I really like to make things, really nice. I get a sense of balance and beauty out of it. But somebody challenged me, and they said, you probably couldn't have the kind of man that would be equal with your strength. And I went, yeah, you're right. Because that scares me.
Maybe because of so much of what has happened to us as women, there's a fear that it won't be equal. It'll be, an imbalance, and we'll be the bottom dog. Maybe that's true for men too. That fear anyone has of being.
It's almost like when you serve all the time, you never have to receive, and so it keeps you really safe. You're always just giving.
What you're bringing up is that in these close encounters of a third kind, which is what these love connections are all about. They're close encounters. It's both exciting and yet very, 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 you said it, terrifying. Because I think that there's no place where we could be more vulnerable than in that close encounter with a significant other. And how we structure our types or our roles or our relationships often have to do with self-protection and safety. They do not have to do with growth and taking the risk and going out on a limb. Because a lot of times it's a broken limb. And we've experienced that. And we form these safe roles. But they're not necessarily leading us in the path of development, of growth, and really true fulfillment, true twin soul connection. And that's some choice and change once we really come to awareness. A lot of this is at a non-fully focused awareness. A lot of it is just below the surface. But it's in moments like today that we can bring it up in a neutral territory among safe colleagues and friends and ask ourselves some fundamental questions. Do I want to make a different kind of involvement and connection in the way I manage and structure? Think too about, when I'm tuning into you right now, I also feel that there is in your body, that you are protecting.
Yeah.
You're protecting a lot from being taken advantage of, misused, and that is part of the issues that our whole being in the world reflects these strategies of self-protection, from our body to our psyche to our soul to all of us. We're literally walking with our armor projected, and it makes it a little bit more difficult to take risks and to feel the self-esteem and to make the real honest emotional communications. and experiment with the rules of the relationship. Would anyone else, before we move on, like to share? Okay, and then the gentleman back there.
Well, I think in my past relationships, I keep running into people who don't want to give as much as I give. Because for me, it's always been a total commitment. It's been looking for a harmony and someone who wants to develop and give as much as I want to give. And I keep running into people who develop a wonderful relationship, but they're not willing to develop, and they're not willing to put out the effort that I'm willing to put out. And I tend to get hurt, but I've learned a lot. I've learned some things the hard way, and I'm just being very careful about those relationships.
Do you choose a type of person in your life that is naturally going to be cool and distant and not as giving as you?
No, the people that the ladies that I'm meeting tend to be very loving and giving on the surface, but the depth isn't really there.
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem I'm having.
Can anyone else identify, what is your name?
John.
John, with John's dilemma of meeting. Can you enhance how you, or embellish how you identify? And I don't know your first
Marbian.
name.
Yeah, it's interesting, I have that down here too, is that I
Did
look
you say
back.
Marty? I'm sorry.
Marbian.
Marbian.
I've given into relationships, and it seems like after the relationship is set and secure, and they're not worried that I'm not going to go anywhere, then all of a sudden it's, instead of a sharing and an equal giving, it's what I can do for them. It's, I need this from you. I want that from you. You are here to serve me.
Did you find that too, in a way?
In a way, but it's more like there's a different type of personality. I'm seeing someone right now who's an Aquarius, and she's got a lot of friends, and we date other people also. But it's not like
Aquarians have a lot of friends.
Yes, they do, and so Libra's like a lot of affection, and she's not willing to make any commitments to, from what I'm saying, commitments to develop the relationship. And that's the point where I'm at right now, and I'm ready to draw the line one way or the other. So if she's not willing to make commitments to develop the relationship and be really serious about it, then I'm wasting my time.
Susan Campbell had a kind of idea to explain these blocks, unequal blocks that we get into. Part of it is that we are drawn to our opposite. We've heard the expression that opposites attract. And that when we meet somebody at some level, intuitively or unconsciously, we're searching for a teacher or a guide who really best represents that area that we are really undifferentiated in, really undeveloped in. This is not our strong suit. And the problem emerges after the romantic bliss, which lasts for a short duration. After that drug-induced experience is over, we really come down to the realizations that we're opposites and that we're drawn to each other's different undeveloped side, looking in a sense for a guide, and who the dominant submission issues, the control and top dog, bottom dog, and all these hierarchy things come in to play. And there we suddenly find ourselves in a negotiation, in a clash of wills, in a power struggle, literally, over differing values and differing strengths and opposite aspects. And not necessarily in the spirit of, well, I can teach you about this part of me that I am so strong and you aren't, and vice versa. But that often doesn't happen, or it's not as conscious. And so you say we draw the line, or we break up, so to speak. Susan Campbell said that's the second stage of love. The first is romantic, and the second is this real intense struggle. And if we can get beyond that, she says, then we can really move to commitment, to a sense of real knowing that we are together, and finally to truly co-creating. But often, many of us don't get beyond that second stage, the clash of wills,
Well,
the power struggle.
I know that I'm in this relationship because there's something I need to learn from. I had met her about 2 years ago, and I saw her for about 3 months, and we split up for same type of reason, but I felt that there was more that I needed to learn. I called her about a year later. She was real excited when I called her, and we got together in between her for about August, something like that. But I knew there was something I needed to learn from this relationship. I learned. I'm always a lover. I think I really don't know. The rest is up to her. That's the way it works.
It's beginning to sound like I'm fed up. The gentleman back there, and you maybe can identify yourself again.
Michael.
Michael.
I did that little inventory you were talking about, and I think I know the major trait that I seem to end up with, have this romantic, passionate ecstasy with at the start, is a woman who I feel that I can help. You know, I know it's not, well.
We have 2 rescuers here.
A lot of identification, don't forget. Everybody's identifying with
Oh,
them.
you're not laughing at me.
No. They're all going, oh yeah, let's do it.
Sure.
We all think we're the only one.
Just open it all up.
For some strange, maybe you guys can relate to this too. For some strange reason, I felt that I was paying out karma in this. That somehow, I mean, yeah, I'm getting kicked and I'm getting tromped on, but you know, it's okay because this karma is going to end. So we're hitting on more notes.
If you had to pay your dues.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the mold I want to get out of, because Lynn said something about cancers on the negative side. I think a little bit that they're pinchers, you know, when they let go of a love, you know. I mean, it's really hard for them to let go. And yeah, that's true, but sometimes remembering that love that you had at the start is, when they're gone, just remembering it is a lot better than being around them and not being fulfilled, you know. So that's, it always seems to end up like that. And I don't care what it takes. I don't care what I have to do. I want to either get this silly notion of karma out of my mind. And I feel that at this point in my life, it's, you know, either put up or shut up, because I can't afford to do this anymore.
Well, one of the most important things is to begin with a feeling of self-love. And I'm not talking about selfishness, because that's born out of self-abnegation or self-hate.
Right.
To really, Satira says, one of the reasons that we don't take the risks to really change fundamentally the way we're choosing and relating in our lives is because we lack fundamentally self-esteem. That we really feel that we're not worth it. And therefore we're choosing from a feeling of self-inadequacy, self-inferiority, self-abnegation, putting ourselves down with karmic overlays. In fact, to serve this cast. But you are the director of your life, and if we really played from the role that I am in the director's chair, and this is my cast, and this is my life, and I can take more control over it in terms of really coming from a place where it's much more equal and more fulfilling and more toward growth, then it begins with a statement of affirmation, self-affirmation. And I mean a healthy kind of self-affirmation. All this selfishness and self-preoccupation is born out of the opposite.
We lost the heart.
So it begins with yourself.
On your sleeve for that.
And I know it's difficult because many of us, if not all of us, find our validation and our worth in these relationships with significant others.
Exactly.
We come on this altar saying, validate me, affirm me, confirm me. And then some of us have the misfortune of going to the courtroom, from the altar to the courtroom, and there is no confirmation. It's subpoena and etc. And that is not where we need to begin to find affirmation. It really needs to begin with oneself. As you are. The statement is, I ain't much, baby, but I'm all I've got. Once you come to that, I think you can come into a relationship without baggage. Clean, pure, free from all this stuff that we bring to relationships, and the past unworked ones, and past life unfulfilled ones, and we come a little bit wholer and cleaner, and then I think the connection is more in the dancing of the light. And I think that's something we all need to begin with, is self-validation. So that's a gift I'd like to extend to you in this moment, Michael.
Thank you. That's good.
Is there anyone else before we move on? One of the words that we use in this is derailed development. That we've all had a derailment in our development. None of us going through the stages of development, even in the best of all possible situations, did not at some point experience derailment. And re-railing, getting back on track, is a real task, developmental task, that each and every one of us faces. And the myth that aging is synonymous with railment and wisdom is baloney. It's baloney. It is a real challenge and task, best accomplished together, to re-rail in our lives and then make these higher connections.
I think one thing I would just like to add is, after listening to the gentleman in particular who spoke, is in what you just shared, in that we have to love ourselves and have our own self-value. It really boils down to, I feel, that there is no one else that should be responsible for our happiness or unhappiness. I think what you're experiencing is what's like at the end of the road, when you find the person that is for you, is what everybody has within this very deep desire to share the very best they have, and to know that what they have to share can fulfill someone else in a small way, or not in a small way, but in a way that encourages them to be all that they can be. And it's you want that for yourself,
Yes,
as
that's
well
right.
as giving it for others. And I think that's kind of like what you're seeing down the road. I mean, you know it's there, you've had it at some point in time, you know it's the truth.
And I'm not
It's
willing
very-
to settle for less.
Yeah, and it's very frustrating. In the meantime, what you're meeting are other people out there who are scared to death. Just scared to death because of what they've experienced in the past also. So.
That's
Yeah,
right.
it has, I don't think it has anything to do with you personally,
No,
they're,
no.
they're frightened.
They're just not willing to put out that commitment, and I dig for that inner person that they're covering up. And I try to help.
They don't know it.
Oh yeah, I try to help them. I wrote her a letter that really, I wish I had it here, I'd read it. It really is an eye opener, and she's, for the first time, she's gonna write me a letter. It should be in the mail today. It's probably there now.
Okay, well, before we get into our karma, anybody want to stretch for just a second? We're going to try to do that every hour, so want to move about or walk about for 3 or 4 minutes?
Go ahead. All right.
This is the new
That's
way.
a street that each and every one of us is clearly aware of, for the most part, into the historical dimensions that we're only vaguely familiar with. But many of us have this feeling of, I've known this person before. And Lynn has done quite a bit of research into this area and from the readings of Edgar Casey. So Lynn, do you want to begin with this exploration into our past lives?
Basically, reincarnation, according to Edgar Casey, is the concept that we all live many lives. Is there anybody here who does not believe in reincarnation?
That was easy.
It's the philosophy that the soul makes many appearances in its journey through the earth, that we are dancing in the light and dancing in the shadow of many past lives. The corollary to reincarnation is the concept of karma, and Michael was talking about that. Karma is basically that whatever we do, whatever we put out to others returns to us, both our good and our bad. Yeah, it's said that since Atlantis and with Lemuria, old souls like all of us in this room may have lived as many as 200 past lives, and that we spend rest periods of about an average of 33 years in between lives. However, I think that time is getting even closer, so we may not rest all that much, right? Grace is the principle of love and forgiveness, and it's grace in the end that we seek rather than karma. To meet karma, it's important for us to forgive as we would be forgiven. When somebody's luck changes, we think it's just something that's happened to them. But oftentimes, it's the result of what they have chosen to do with their opportunity, turning their karma, instead of a burden and a drudgery, into making it something peaceful and making a beauty out of it. Some examples of karma in the physical just might include asthma. It was said that somebody who had pressed the life out of others in a past life might contract asthma in this life. Arthritis, being stiff and inflexible attitudes. Epilepsy, interestingly, was the misuse of psychic and occult forces in past lives. Tuberculosis, since we're talking about relationships, tuberculosis was known in the last century because each century sort of has its disease, and tuberculosis was known as the saint's disease because many nuns and many priests had this disease. But in reality, Casey suggested that these very nuns and monks and priests of the past had also been libertines or very much sexually overindulged in another life, because the soul is always striving for balance. We're extremists, we old souls, and everyone in this room is that way. The mark of an old soul, Casey said, is it's the man who's so much a little boy, the woman so much a little girl, not childish, but childlike. Trusting, if you're an old soul, you don't have a thick skin. Things get to you deeply. And maybe all the old souls here in this room are kind of the rescuers by nature in a way, because we do feel, and we're here to help, and we're here to bring comfort. Insanity was talked about as the misuse of psychic power in the past. So the people in mental institutions who are all of a sudden aware that feeling that they're Napoleon and Cleopatra and hearing voices, some of this may be scrambled past life information and a lack of the protection that we should have in our glandular or psychic centers, so that they're aware of the lower astral realms and feel very upset by that. Cancer is a disease of our time. Hopefully we're going to conquer that. It was suggested that possibly in a past life, maybe in this life, that there have been a tendency, instead of getting angry and getting it out and over with, that a person might have held a resentment deep within, or perhaps even have been too nice on the surface and needs to get that anger out. So cancer can relate to a resentment. I myself have a fairly severely autistically handicapped child, and that karma for me originated in a past life where I was I was actually born into a family where my half-sister married the poet Percy Bysshe Shelley. And I was 17 when my half-sister married Shelley, ran off with Shelley, and so I was taken along with them into their household. And being of a romantic and extremist nature, I too wanted to be in love with a poet. So I promptly I've discovered this through dreams. It probably sounds as if it's an ego trip, but it seems real to me. The person I discovered would not be known to you. She wasn't particularly famous, nor did she write or anything successfully in that lifetime. However, being of a romantic bent, I wanted very much to be like my sister. So I wrote many letters to Byron, whom they all wanted to meet. And as a result of that, there was a brief love affair, and a little girl was born. But he soon, being of the Don Juan script, tired of me in that past life, and so I was left with this child. But I kept entertaining the hope that if I wrote to him enough, we would be reunited, we'd be a very romantic sort of a couple. And so finally, he agreed to take the little girl, and I thought this was the bridge, my doorway into the relationship. So I sent her with her nanny to be with him. And for a while, she was a small infant. He paraded her around London in carriages and showed her off, and then he grew tired of her and sent her to a convent where she was nursed by some nuns, one of whom I now know who you are. and I grieved very much because he would not let me see her. He felt that she should be raised in a certain dogma or whatever, and then she died. Well, in this life, she was very bright in that lifetime. In this lifetime, my child is fairly severely handicapped, and many times for a relationship or for my own self-expression, I have wanted to be free, to be honest, of the burden of her care at times. And no matter how hard I try, I could not be. Even when I tried her in a group living situation, conditions weren't right, and it's as if I must see this through. You know, it's just something that I have going to have to walk through to the end with this. Not to say she may not find a loving residence or whatever, but only I think when the karma is really resolved.
How about her karma, coming back as an autistic child?
She would definitely have her own karma. I don't know it because I'm not her. However, it's said that people who are retarded or autistic-like were geniuses. I mean, they were super brilliant. And you look at these autistic children, a lot of them are like, not idiot savant, but almost. They have some ability that's still left. My daughter has an extremely powerful mind, although her IQ is very limited. It's probably in the high 40s, if you can even test such a child. But if anyone knows my daughter, she's very powerful, isn't she?
She is.
She's extremely powerful, and she's taught me that love isn't just with a mind. You know, she's taught me more about what love really is, that it's an exchange, and that any soul, no matter what limitation of mind or body, that love is the final essence, and that a person seemingly limited in mind or body may be more capable of love than any one of us here. Casey gave a reading to a man who had a gay lifestyle in this lifetime, and for some people that's a very appropriate choice. He was uncomfortable with it, and he had been told that in a past life, in the court of Louis XIV, I believe, that he had been a caricaturist, and he just enjoyed making fun of people who had chosen a gay preference. He drew all kinds of pictures and decided that their dress was not okay and not significant, and Casey said, whatever we do, we're going to walk in those shoes, you know, so watch condemnation of any race, of any sexual preference, because whatever you condemn, you can come back and be. In terms of relationships, some people here may have experienced almost a platonic marriage where the sexual element seems very much blocked. This can, you're laughing. It's a very frustrating situation. This can be the karmic carryover from a lifetime in either a mystery temple or as a nun or a priest where you took a vow and you said, I am really choosing out of free will that I am going to give up sex in this lifetime. And I don't think anything in any path is really indicated that you have to. But if you did it and you really meant it, and then you found some cute fellow or whatever in the convent or in the neighboring monastery or wherever, and you went back on your own ideal, then you violated something deep within yourself. And in that sense, then you may find yourself back with that same person that you fooled around with, and for some reason or the other, physical reasons, emotional reasons, you just can't get it together. And it's like a vow you make, you kind of have to fulfill, if you follow what I'm saying.
Can you renegotiate your
That might be possible, or let go of the guilt.
Yes, you can.
I think you could. I think you could. Grace is the melting pot. It's said by Casey that only in the Christ consciousness do extremes meet. The only place that the shadow and the light can meet is in the Christ consciousness, which is the giving up of self. It's the loving more for another than ourselves. And I'm not saying it necessarily in a dogmatic way, but that Christ spark that's within everyone here, Jewish or Christian, Muslim or feminist. There's good karma too. Everybody says your karma got you. There is good karma too. And we've probably all been together as a group somewhere, or we wouldn't be sitting here today. We're talking about my daughter, Lexi, who's doing the photography, has been very kind and very giving toward my daughter. She just seemed to emerge at a time when we really needed that to go on and keep things together. She's a positive karma somehow for us. I don't know how, I'm not questioning it. She's a positive karmic influence that's come back into our lives. So your friendships, the people you love and care for, the people that you have relationships with, and it feels like you could just, when you see them, you're picking up, or even when you meet them, you're picking up where you left off. And there's just that feeling of inner trust and knowing. This is your good karma. Your intelligence, your ability to have a talent at music, your certain aspects of beauty, although beauty, as we all know, is only skin deep, but many of these things were built up positively in past lives. There was a young woman, I've mentioned this fairly frequently, there's a young woman in the 30s when Casey gave readings whose hands were featured on billboards and so forth, and she made a great deal of money with this, and she was told that she had worked also in a convent, and a lot of convents today, and she had been given the most menial tasks, as if others were sort of jealous of her, and they assigned her to the scullery, year after year, but she determined that she would bless her hands and that everything she did would be done with love. So in this lifetime, she found her hands just sort of drawn like a magnet to an opportunity where her hands, for the early Palmolive commercials or whatever, amassed her a great fortune with little effort. And it was something that she had truly earned on a soul level from before. If you've worked out a karma in one life, for example, there was a young fellow who was told by Edgar Cayce that this guy liked to hunt. And he liked to hunt with a real love of blood. I mean, he liked to see little animals die. He got off on this. And he was told that in a past life that he was a Norman invader in England. And in that lifetime, he was quite heavy set. And when some Anglo-Saxons that he had taken prisoner made fun of him from a high stone wall, he was in a position of power, and he ordered all of their hands cut off at the wrist. In another lifetime, he was told that during the Crusades, the same man, now called John, met exact karma when his hands were cut off at the wrist as he sought to escape the enemy over a high stone wall. And in this lifetime, finally, he was told that even though his hand, I mean, he had actually literally exactly reaped this karma, but he was told that by enjoying this sort of death of the animals in a negative sense, he could reactivate something that he had sort of paid off and cleared up. So there's something to be said for positive attitudes in the present, even when we've worked out something karmic. All the good that we've ever achieved in any lifetime remains with us and can be set into motion to overcome the law of cause and effect. So that, for example, let's say a father and son have been rivals in a recent past life over one woman. And it's happened to one family that got readings from Cayce. Supposing this couple who was very close, or reasonably close, got married, immediately had a son, and from the time the son was born, it seemed that there was an unrest. Now you can say that Freud, in terms of Freud, this may be a classic Oedipus complex. However, I think that what we think of as Oedipus complexes are somewhat individualized. If you're a woman, a girl, who's been very close to her mother above all the people in the family in past lives, it's not too likely that you're going to be in that kind of a rivalrous triangle with that mother that you're the closest to. But in this case, the father and the son had recently, what Cayce said, disputed the passage. They'd hassled each other and rocked the boat. And one of the best ways for us to work out our karma is to get born as relatives with these people that we don't want to deal with. But on the other hand, the same father and son in another past life had been brothers, and they had developed a bond of love. And you really can't work out karma without love. So what they did is they worked on the grace aspect. They built up their relationship, the father relating more to the son, and they invoked the grace principle instead of staying in the shadow of the negative karmic rivalry situation. Oftentimes when we're reflecting past lives with somebody, say if Nancy and I are reflecting a past life, we may go along in one cycle for a while. Where maybe in the back of my mind I'll just sort of see her as a mother, but I never really focus on it. And all of a sudden I feel like I'm the mother, and we've entered a new past life cycle. There's a lot of material on how to discover your past lives. I don't know how heavily we'll deal with this, but I can touch on some of the suggestions. It's very important to desire to do so, not for reasons of building yourself up, self-aggrandizement, but for the purpose of understanding your present purpose in the earth. And if you are a courageous soul, to know the reason of karmic patterns in the present. When Cayce was asked, did anyone have the abilities of Edgar Cayce? He said, yes, everyone does. You do for yourself. You are your own best psychic. You hear a lot of Cayce-oriented background with me. My teacher, Jessica Madigan, whose picture is here, made her transition from the physical body in her 70s this last April, and she was in many ways an interpreter of Cayce. So it's been a legacy that has been passed to me, but I know that there are many ways. It's not like a dogma.
Was she also called Mylene?
Yeah. You read her work?
I bet her. I was in the classes.
Oh, well, nice. You look like her, sort of.
Yeah, she does.
Yeah, that's it.
May I share, to make it a little bit more embodied with experience, this concept of reincarnation? Let me share a vignette from my life, and then maybe invite you to share a vignette from your life about how Lynn and I think perhaps we discovered a past life connection. When I was 18, and Lynn was 15, we met in this garage in Menlo Park. And I was always in an atypical role in my family. My brother was tops in high school and an athlete, scholar, etc. And I had a learning disability and never quite fit in. It's kind of like a misfit, and I did not have self-affirmation. I felt kind of not with it. And on this particular day, I had invited my brother and his friends over to a party, and I was kind of proud, and suddenly they started picking on me for not having shoes.
This is the 60s, and it's very in that.
Or wearing sandals, or something of that sort. And Lynn came to my defense, out of nowhere, stood up and said, in her very strong way, that you people shouldn't be so opinionated and so on and so forth. And so Lynn and I struck an immediate connection and became kind of like side companions, sidekicks, twin souls, soulmates. It was not so much a romantic relationship, although I had romantic, erotic feelings. It was more, or at least from her viewpoint, it was more like that of a guide. That here's somebody that needs some guidance or direction to realize that he is unique and capable and okay person in this world. And so even though I was 18 and she was 15, I felt it was like a big sister, a guardian angel, somebody intervening that really recognized my worth and potential that seemed to be obscure and hidden from my peers and from in my family dynamics. And so that period left with us departing, and she said she was going off to a Hopi reservation as part of a new high school experimental thing, and I said goodbye to what I thought was an interesting and evocative and understanding and God, fire princess, etc., etc. And I wrote about it in my journal. And then 20 years later, I met Lynn through a senior that I worked with, an older adult, and that Lynn had been in contact with. And I looked at her and I said, I know you from somewhere before. I know you from somewhere before. And suddenly it dawned on me, this is Lynn Rogers, who was this very important person in my life at 18. And here now, 20 years later or so. And so then she has no recall of that moment at 18, 15. She has totally blocked it out. But I was able to tell her it was not all fantasy because I pointed out details, including the geography of her bedroom. I got in her bedroom, but that's as far as I got. Including the geography of her room, that would be beyond any kind of falsification. At that point in time, though, she pointed out that perhaps we had a past life connection, not even greater than this particular life. And we went back to a period, since we're both drawn to service and both drawn to, and I was raised Catholic, it seemed to make sense to be drawn back to a period of time with St. Francis and Clare. And so we began to draw upon the possibility that there might be a past life connection for us.
In that time period.
In that time period. I'm not saying that I was Francis, I'm not into megalomania, or that she was Clare, but that we feel that somehow, in some role, much like the Franciscans and Clare, and the Order of Clare, that we were kind of people that were drawn to recognize each other's potential and to realize that our role together was that of service, and that not one of eros as much as one of agape. And so we've been really drawn to that possibility. And here we are again in a kind of service mode, sharing our divergent skills in giving something along those lines. So I'm trying to give you a process for how this emerges. And it's really at first a vague kind of impression. and then it begins to become clearer. We've shared periods of the time of Francis and Clare, and photographs even of Clare and Francis, and interestingly realized that my father's name is Francis Clare. So there's some parallels that come on, and now to the objective world, and if I were to tell my brother this, I would be back where I was in the garage. That's completely out on a limb. But from within my own experience, I don't see it as Shirley MacLaine would say, as so outrageously impossible that perhaps we were twin souls in a past life, recognizing each other's potential and continuously drawn to the same thing, and the flaws within our personality, like that I happen to be a very eros and passionate Scorpio type, that one of which can be anything in excess can be a flaw. That one of the things, like Francis, that I really need to do is create an order that stresses emphatically denial and not getting too involved in those kinds of issues.
Well,
rather to give rather than to receive.
The old soul is really an extremist, and so remember the extremist soul, and since times are being sped up now, we're getting near the Aquarian age, which is the age of remembrance, the age of bringing back to our own consciousness our past life memories. This is the time that we really we're cycling through a lot of these extremes. Some of us may feel as if we've lived several lifetimes in one right now, and we are playing out these extremes in our personality. We may try dramatically different lifestyles. I mean, we may go through, and that all of these reflect past lives.
Are we hearing a giggle from an extremist over there?
And, I mean, for example, if you're a woman who lived on the Isle of Lesbos in ancient Greece, when there was a group of women who had been much sort of persecuted with the Chinese foot binding, that's one of my favorite causes, and so forth, who got together to incarnate to have several lifetimes where they would study the arts and bond with one another. But as they were raped, pillaged, and plundered by some of the soldiers of Alexander, they found themselves turning to one another for comfort and affection. And so they're people we have memories of all these things. We have played all the roles. Interesting, I happen to have this book on Francis and Clare, I'll read it, which is not necessarily to say that Larry or I were those exact individuals, and certainly we have a lifetime there. In Francis's private life, there was a touch of almost romantic spiritual affection for Clara of the Poor Ladies. The rule permitted him to see her but seldom, yet when he was in trouble, he went to her for sympathy, and her prayers were constantly being offered on his behalf. It was interesting, when we were exploring that past life, we had a synchronistic experience, as so often happens when you're being led to a past life. And we were talking about how there was almost a Beatrice and Dante-like quality to some of the that we associated with this, and within minutes we were in a bookstore opening this book up that talked about a Beatrice and Dante parallel to the lifetime of Clare and Francis, or those people in that order. So one of the ways that you discover past lives is simply that you're led. You are really led. And if the desire is sincere, let me touch on a few of the ways that you can work with past lives. Desire is the most important thing. Remember that it's not to build yourself up. Boy, I was in the order of Clare's, but because you can make your worst karma in a very sainted life, and you can be, probably the only real sin, Casey thought, my teacher Jessica thought, is self-righteousness. That you are right, and your religious way is it, and everything else is devilish or wrong is probably the only sin. So Annie Besant of the Theosophist said, "You have forgotten your childhood, though you have the same physical brain now. In another life you had a different brain. It is only spirit which passes from life to life. If we are to remember past incarnations, we must reach the memory of spirit. When a child enters at the moment of birth, the soul self," and Casey said that we don't really, our soul isn't tucked neatly into our body. If this is the body, this thumbnail, this is the soul. Really, our body is just living inside the soul, which has played all the many parts. If we are to remember past incarnations, we must reach the memory of spirit. In the Aquarian age, where we bring all things to remembrance, we can tap into the cosmic library the records on the skeins of time and space called the Akashic records, and by various methodologies we can remember other lifetimes. When people have a near-death experience, this lifetime flashes before their eyes in a second. When people leave this physical body in what we call death, which is only the birth into another realm, and probably a more positive realm than here, all of our previous lives similarly come into our awareness and recognition. One of the best ways to remember past lives and also to discover past lives with your twin soul, which we're going to get into, to understand why the people that you love and hate are in your life. Dreams are really a marvelous tool. I work a lot with that. Novels can be written of people's past lives which can be discovered in dreams. Cheryl, may I comment about you? Cheryl is in a relationship that's somewhat karmic by circumstance, and possibly with her twin soul, but she's not able to fully be with him in this lifetime at this time. And she's finding that through that, she's opening the door to far memory. She's beginning to dream of times that they've shared together. And in a sense, they're being closer, even though they're blocked from being fully together. And there's a great beauty about that. If you have a dream of reincarnation, one of the keys of it is that some say colored dreams may indicate reincarnation. Dreams of houses, mansions, or apartments may indicate a part of your past. When I first got involved in all of this, when I was about 19 or 20, I had a dream that in driving up a freeway and then finally having to bicycle and then walk on a very narrow road, I suddenly saw a man who was then kind of a spiritual teacher with a bulldozer, and he was shoveling toward me this enormous stack of buildings. They were all crumbly. And it was as if they were all my past lives, that awareness struggling to come into my consciousness. If you dream about a past life, you may dream of some kind of a costume, an old coin. You may, if you have a friend, you may see your friend and she's her, but there's something different about her. I think a lot of us have had that dream. And that's often that you're saying, I'm dreaming of her as I knew her when she was somebody else to me. The simple thing with dreams, there are many complex psychological schools on dreams. I liked what I was taught. It has worked for me. Basically write the dream down or tape record it, and then underline the key phrases. What does this mean to me, simply? If I dreamed of, infamous example, my friend Mary driving a red car up a steep road, I would ask myself, who is Mary to me? If Mary is a rather stubborn friend of mine, and that's what I'm thinking right this week about her, that's probably an aspect of me that's being stubborn, and so on and so forth through the symbols of the dream. So that dreams are one tool in which you can discover past lives. Even a past life dream will try to pertain to your present life's problems and try to give keys for you. I had a dream, I have a somewhat alienated relationship with my father, and I had a dream. I have a sister who was, when Larry and I apparently were in the 60s and espousing all the wild free movements, I was persona non grata because I was out at the front of the marches. I was, always, my father was high up in the government, and this was not an appropriate thing to do in my community, to make your parents be accused of being too extreme. And so there was an alienation, there was a derailed development. We're probably close underneath, but our development has gotten derailed. And I have a sister who's a bit younger who followed the script that was more preferable in the family. She did a lot of shopping at Macy's and Saks Fifth Avenue and lay by the pool, and this was appropriate. So I never understood why I felt very displaced and shoved out. And the child in me, whatever mental or spiritual understanding I have, I still have the rejected child. Because the rejected child inside of us doesn't exactly reason on this level always. But on the one occasion in my adult life that I stayed in my father's home in my sister's room, I was repaying a debt. I had a dream. My ex-husband and I had gone out to dinner with him. And it was one of those moments where I felt a little closer to him. And I had this dream, and in the dream, I dreamed that my father had been married in a past life to my sister, and that they did indeed love one another. But then I dreamed that he had a mistress who he loved a little bit more, and apparently that was me. And it suddenly made sense to me that my sister now seemed so anxious for me to have absolutely nothing. Which, wouldn't you feel that way about your husband's mistress? And maybe And maybe there was a guilt on my father's part that caused a distancing. Sometimes when there's a closeness, there's also a distancing to push away that memory. I don't know. But it was definitely a dream of revelation. At the same time, same night actually, I dreamed a dream relative to my brother who, when my parents divorced, there was a great deal of turmoil in the house. And in a sense, he was emotionally abandoned, even in the midst of, not wealth, but comfortable circumstances. They were very immature and fighting constantly at a time when he was in his early teens. And I dreamed that in a past life, this is an interesting view of karma, I dreamed that he had been the father of 3 little children, whom he had gone off and left, a wife and 3 children, and maybe during the Crusades, I don't know. But in a sense, his parents, although giving him all the physical things, had totally abandoned him. They were so caught up in their anger and hate toward each other that he may as well have been abandoned himself, and we were one of 3 children. So I thought that was very interesting too. With your past life dreams or what have you, it's really important that you go very much with feelings and with the imagination, not so much on the intellect to make those associations. Other methods of remembering past lives include meditation and hypnosis, group reveries. Lexi's an excellent regressionist who does wonderful past life regressions. She's also a hypnotist. Meditation, where you have inner knowings, inner voices that give you past life symbols and keys. With hypnosis per se, it's important to have a hypnotherapist that directs you to things that are in accord with your higher self. More of a new age hypnotherapist than some of the more traditional I would recommend. There are always going to be moments of lifted memory and unconscious past life recall, such as Larry and I've shared. Those moments, it just seems as if you walk through time and you're someone else, emotionally and in other ways. One of the ministers at our church, new minister Mary Garry, her husband, Tom Garry, was told by my teacher Jessica in a reading before her death that he had been Nathaniel Hawthorne, the author, and that she had been his beloved wife, who he really felt was a twin soul. And if anyone knows them today, they're one of the most twin soul couples that are going. They truly love and are devoted to each other in every way. And she was skeptical. She's more of a left brain analytical type, and he's more of a, right brain type or whatever. So much for gender stereotypes. In any case, she went on a business trip to the town that Hawthorne had lived in, and while there, she skeptically visited the house that Hawthorne's wife had lived in, and she found herself on the tour, I believe even getting lost on a stairway and saying...
Didn't she ask as proof that she be led if it were so, because she didn't even know where it was, and didn't she take off on faith and start driving?
Yes.
Yeah, first she went to the house, and I think she said, as she was walking through it, she said, "Oh, I have always hated these stairs. They're too narrow." I mean, she became somebody else, and as she was leaving town, she said, "If this is really so, give me some confirmation." I think she almost drove the car right into the birthplace house of this woman. So this was a moment of lifted memory. Other ways of determining past lives can be simply to look at the people and situations in your life, the things that you hate and love the most, and reverse these things. For example, if you have had a critical parent, and you have a critical spouse, and you have a critical employer, and you're constantly dominated by somebody who's extremely critical, reverse this. You are always meeting yourself, literally. This critical parent may have been the very kind of energy that you put out in past lives to those who are subjective to you, whether in work or your children or whatever. If you identify with famous people, such as obviously Larry and I identify with Clare and Francis, it could also be true that this can be a pattern. That not everybody can have been whomever, Napoleon. But there are a lot of petty tyrants in this world, sometimes even in their own house. There are a lot of Cleopatras, just in a small court someplace, in their own family circumstance. I'm sure we all know a few queens and kings that do it in their own home. So you'll identify with a pattern. If a lot of us who are in the 60s, for example, were to come back, which we will, in the Aquarian age, it's said that all of us, now we're in a period of testing. The years 1958 to 1998 are the greatest period of testing that the world has ever known. Casey said that every soul living now will feel the lash of the whip to the ego at one time or the other. The ego being the self-will, the part of us that's in the way of any kind of relationship working out at times. In any case, when we come back, say some of these 60s types, may come back, and those who were full of the civil rights causes and this kind of thing, if that was their preference, they may all think that they were Martin Luther King, or they were, a Kennedy, or they were Angela Davis or something. And it's not necessarily that they were, but they share the ideals. They may have gone out and, done something. Similarly, if someone is extremely fond of the Reagans in the era of conservatism, they might think in a past life that they really were Reagan, or really were Nancy Reagan. So it's a matter of identification. If you look at, Larry was asking you to look at patterns in your life. You can also do this in terms of past lives. If you look at a pattern that's repeated and repeated and repeated, first look for the unconscious psychological reason. For example, I'm going to touch a lot on the Don Juan Messalina love script in a minute. That's the person who has many loves, and they just get through that first stage of love, and then they dump the relationship. Has anyone known people like that? And then they go on to another. First, you look for the unconscious reason. Is that individual deeply attached to a mother or father image that they are still being loyal to, and hence they'll never really make that commitment to someone else? But also there can be past life karmic things at work here. Again, subconscious adherence to a vow. It could be that, whatever. We'll get into that further. One example of a relationship karma that I wanted to share with you is that of a young woman who was very much wanting to meet her twin soul. By this time she wasn't so young. And she just seemed to really be blocked from it. She kept being disappointed in her relationships in love. And she was told that in a past life in Atlantis, she was in a position of power, and she had many loves that she took. In the latter day cycles of Atlantis, women may have enjoyed quite a bit of leadership and prominence, and there can have been a karmic reversal in some of the cycles that we go through, like the China cycle, etc. But she was told that would just take one guy after another, and she wanted to produce a perfect child, perfect in mind and body, not necessarily spiritually. These guys were just used along the way, and she was tired of somebody, and that was it. She dropped them without thought of their feelings or the attachment that they might have formed. So in this life, it seemed possible that she might not have an opportunity this time to be with her twin soul. But she had to meet these men that she'd had this with and experience and work this through. So she had more than one relationship as a part of doing this. So that's a little bit about how karma can be at work in our relationships. I wanted to share with you briefly a few reincarnation illustrations, and maybe as I can, it's a lot to pass around, maybe I'll hold them up. If you have questions also about that, this would be a time to do this. I enjoy cutting these out of schlocky magazines. I don't read the Inquirer, I'm always doing it for research. But here's a guy, this guy is, remember Davy Crockett? Well, this fellow suddenly, it says in People magazine, down in Texas they're bracing for the rerun of a celebrated piece of history. Storming the ramparts is Garry Foreman, a Yankee for goodness sake, who thinks he knows better than this group of daughters of the Republic who are preserving the Alamo. He's literally besieging it. He's obsessed with it, and I can pass this around. There is some similarity to this man's face and that of the past life portrait of Davy Crockett. For Lexi. Maybe we can look at them after.
Thank you,
During
Mary.
the time we're doing individual session. This is a story of a girl who is a psychology student at the University of California at Berkeley. She believes that she was a Jewish young woman who chose semi-suicidally to die in a car crash rather than being murdered by the Nazis. Better to die by the hands of love than by the hands of fate. And she thinks that many of the young people who rallied for an end to the Vietnam War and now for nuclear disarmament had died in the Holocaust and had come back to ensure peaceful ways of existence. And she's going to dedicate her life also to making these reincarnational connections. Now this one's really a good example. This woman says, I wanted to fly the Pacific before I knew anything about Amelia Earhart or her last flight, says pilot Grace McGuire. Now that I know Amelia had the same dream, it just strengthens my determination to make it a reality. This woman was born sufficiently after the disappearance of Amelia Earhart, and it's said that if if you really find a past life that you can research, like you dream of a clue and it leads you to the library and you find a picture, whatever, that you could almost have posed for the portrait. And I'd like to share with you. This is Amelia Earhart, and this is oh, Lexi, can you get that?
Yeah, got it here.
It's like the same energy.
Yeah. Now here's one I question. Madonna believes that she's Marilyn Monroe. There's one small problem. That Madonna was born while Marilyn Monroe was still living. Now, I think this is a clear example of somebody who, well, heroine worship, and also a pattern. Madonna may have experienced a past life where she was, you know, a vulnerable, dramatic person who may have shared some of Marilyn's personality, but I do feel a little bit different energy between Marilyn Monroe and Madonna. I have more of an affinity toward Marilyn Monroe. Interestingly, my teacher Jessica had a doctor in Los Angeles years ago in common with Marilyn Monroe, and one day she was very surprised when she went in for a metabolic test at 7:30 in the morning to find herself seated in the waiting room with the world's most famous glamour girl. Their doctor was a woman doctor, a little bit more gently oriented, and when Marilyn went in for her appointment, there was a transom and a very thin wall, and Jessica, I'm sure not by chance, heard Marilyn open up to the doctor, and she said she had brought with her a volume of Goethe and Spinoza or whatever. Here was this person reputed to be, you know, the sex symbol of all time, and she told the doctor that she was seeking a platonic, almost a twin soul. She said she had resorted to eating garlic through 3 marriages, and that they all had promised her it would be platonic. The doctor tried to explain to her that the physical is a part of love, also. But apparently from scars in her childhood, and because of the old soul nature she might have had, she was really seeking something of a spiritual nature, and I thought that was real interesting. Finally, here's a guy, I'm not sure, this is one of the descendants of, let me just read, of Thomas Jefferson. Robert Coles III is the great-great-great-great-great-grandson of Thomas Jefferson. The likeness is uncanny and leaves an almost eerie feeling in the beholder. For some reason, he's gotten into the job of going around and being living history. He is bringing Jefferson's life to life, and he says, when I do this, I am not giving a lecture. I am Thomas Jefferson. Whether he is or he was very close to Jefferson, there's also a resemblance there. Okay.
When I lived in Washington, D.C., there was a man back there went dressed as Abe Lincoln all the time.
Yeah.
And he's still appearing as Abe Lincoln back east. And he says he is Abe Lincoln.
Does he? Mm-hmm. Well, again, he may have admired, lived in that period, admired Abe Lincoln, and been in politics to some degree, so he identifies with this.
Right.
Okay.
As we know, there's a number of people who feel they're Jesus at this time in our history.
Or they're everywhere.
One of which was one of my ex-husbands. And he truly feels that. Yes.
Your ex-husband thought they were Jesus?
He still does.
I have
What
a
I know.
friend graduated from the same Washington Lee High School that, now his name skips my mind, Shirley McLean went to.
Oh, did you?
And I took public speaking under her public speaking teacher back there, so I heard a lot of stories about, as a young woman.
Mm-hmm.
She was just as vivacious then as she is now. She's just really been a very good person all these years.
Interesting. She's really opened doors recently for metaphysicians. My feeling about her is that whether you might climb out on every limb she did or not, she's sincere. And she's showing you what it's like to seek. And maybe we say, gee, I would have gone for that. I'm not sure I believe in that. But it's all very sincere. And at least it's opening the public in this time of such extreme reaction, almost witch hunting of this, to looking at it. It's also a time, Edgar Casey said that as we get closer to the year 2000, where it is certainly possible that we may have, as we come into a new age or era, we may have a polar axis shift, some earth changes. He said that if Mount Pelée or Mount Vesuvius, one is in Martinique and one is in Italy, ever had the greater eruption, the Californian, indeed, parts of it really could go into the sea. But he said as we get closer to the turn of the century, there are going to be many extreme people and groups calling to us, wanting us to participate. And some are good, some not so good. We see some gurus we like, and we see some we don't like. And we see extreme religions that hate everything if it's not theirs. And then we see some cult-like things. And it's a time that we have to I think, go back to that center point and say, does this bring peace, comfort? Is it helpful to others? I mean, what are the fruits of this thing before unqualifiedly jumping into it? Okay, if you don't have any questions, I want to jump right into Twin Souls from Karma and Reincarnation. Are there any questions that you wanted to ask about?
Is there anyone who would care to share their own experiences? Does anyone here in the audience have a vignette from their life in which they experience a past?
Speaking of my ex-husband, who now thinks he's Jesus Christ. Before deciding that he was Jesus Christ, he was somebody else. So many times he would try to strangle me. So after I finally got rid of him, I did a past life regression on myself and went back to an Egyptian time when I was a priestess, and he was with the Egyptian palace and wanted me to leave the priestess, hood, where you didn't take any men at this time. And I said no, so he stabbed me in the throat. And so I thought, no wonder he was always trying to go for my throat. So here we are. Well, he finally cut that karmic tie, thank God. We got rid of it. So that's just one,
What do you think, Lexi, long ago you could have done to him?
I've got to look into that. Definitely. I blessed him out of my life this time. Yeah.
As a priestess, the role was a very powerful role.
Yes.
And you were obviously selected for that as a very powerful person. So he may have felt really threatened. And most violence comes from a position of,
Yes.
I'm not okay, a feeling of
Well,
inadequacy.
as we found out later on, this was a deep-seated problem he had anyway.
And in your relationship, you might have felt very inadequate.
In any relationship. Bless his heart, but he had a number of problems.
The statement that I'm Jesus
Yes.
may not
Well,
be
he
a
didn't
karmic,
like to be a follower.
may not be a karmic
Yes.
insight as
No.
much as it may be a compensatory
Yes.
strategy for
Yes.
the feelings of inadequacy. But is there anybody else that would care to share?
Adele?
I had an interesting triangle type of experience in this lifetime where I had two people that I met in a company that I worked for, and they had an immediate bonding. He was married at the time and eventually left his wife. They broke up, and the two of them got together into a very volatile, a very powerful, erotic, etc. type of love relationship. And this girl befriended me and looked up to me. I was really like her first teacher in metaphysics, etc., and opened her up to her own spiritual awareness. And I would offer, all kinds of advice and everything in this relationship with this guy. And I really thought a lot of him, but I had had a dream of him before she had come to work there, that he and I had been sexually interacting at one point. And so I felt this was a past life thing, so I always kind of steered clear of him because something seemed to be wrong with it. Well, as they became more enamored of each other and I would participate in the relationship, and I was this little vamp at that time in my life, I was running around being a little sex pot. And I was not aware of it because I always treated him with respect, but distance. And I did not know it, but he would always point to me as the sexual ideal that this girl should be, and would criticize her body and her style and her look and everything and tell her, why don't you be more like Adele and all this, and I never knew about this. But she had a growing jealousy and rage about it that was being directed towards me. And of course, sometimes when the closer you are to somebody, the less you can see. You're kind of blinded by that. And at a certain point in our lives, we ended up living together. This girl and I did, while she was in the middle of this relationship with this guy. And over the course of a year, things became quite strained. I was less and less able to deal with the two of them, till it finally culminated, and he was going to move in, and I said, well, I'm moving out. And the night before I was moving out, I was standing at the kitchen sink doing something, and all of a sudden I had this recall, and I couldn't be clear on where it was coming from, but I said, she poisoned me. And I was just stunned that this had happened. Well, a couple days later, after I'd moved out, I came back to get a couple things, and she'd left me a very simple note about, you left such and such in the bedroom, and I knew wouldn't want to forget it, so please make sure you take it. And I looked at the note, and I thought, there's something wrong with this, but I couldn't see what it was. So I took it to a psychic whom I trusted, and I put it in an envelope. I gave it to her, and I said, I just want you to tell me what you pick up on this. And so she held it for a moment, and she said, you were sisters with this person in Egypt, and you loved her dearly. You looked up to her. She was like an older sister. She taught you a great deal, and you just thought that the sun rose and set in her. You were both very beautiful, and she was involved with a young man who had a great deal of power in the government, whom she's involved with now. And they were meant to be married, but she felt that the man that was in love with you, and because she somehow felt that you were more beautiful than her, she became quite threatened by that. So she poisoned you one night. And when she told me that, I immediately had a recall of that particular past life experience, and I saw exactly where we were. In fact, our hair color was somewhat similar to this girl right here. It was a kind of a coppery red color. And she had told me, why don't you lie down and rest before this party or event that we were going to? And she said, here, I'll bring you something to drink. And she gave it to me. And about 15 seconds after she gave it to me, I started to choke. And then I realized something terrible had happened. And then because I was also psychic, I realized I'd been poisoned. And I said, something's wrong. I've been poisoned. This is poison. Get help for me. And she stood at the end of the doorway and just watched me die. And I realized as I was dying that she had been the one to kill me. And I had such a rage over it that because I was so hurt, that I had carried that for thousands of years. And it's still hard for me to talk about. When I got this information and I realized that this experience, it released this rage that I had carried for so many years. And I was so angry that I got in my car and drove down San Carlos Boulevard in San Jose at 55 miles an hour in the middle of the day. How I didn't hit anybody, I'll never know. But I mean, I raced up and down the road like a maniac for about 30 minutes until I was finally able to control myself enough to realize that I wouldn't kill her in this life because I was so mad at her for the last one, you know. And it was something that took me a long time to work through, in spite of my understanding of metaphysics and whatever, to work through and release the anger that I had about it and to forgive what had happened in that past life and to understand the dynamics in this lifetime on a psychological as well as a metaphysical or a karmic level that were operating in this relationship between the three of us.
This is almost like you had to, there was a terrible charge out there in the ethers of this trauma, and you came together to make better choices and to release some of this and heal it.
Yes.
Your Casey says the scars are on thine own soul. How can you tell if it's a past life? If you think you're George Washington and you think, wow, I was the father of the country and it was wonderful, it's probably not you. If you think, that's nice, but gee, I wish my false teeth hadn't fallen out when I crossed the Delaware, and it was terrible when my wife did so-and-so, it probably was you. Because the scars, he said, are written on thine own soul, and that's how you can really tell. That's a really good example of coming to memory from several different ways. The psychic, her own awareness. I mean, if you truly, sincerely desire to remember, you will, and it will be shown to you.
Can somebody hear it? Vignette?
Yeah, in my ex-husband and during the marriage that we had together, we were very much in love, got married, and very shortly after we got married, I contracted 2 terminal illnesses, which made our marriage a very difficult situation to be in, and it was extremely scary for all of us concerned. And it took 7 years to overcome, a lot of work and love on everybody's part to overcome this. It wasn't a very peaceful road on a lot of different levels, understandably so, because it's a lot to deal with. And I can remember during all those years, it was like the one thing that kept me going, to keep fighting, to stay alive, to overcome all this, was so that I could be strong and healthy and have the marriage and the love in the way that we had all wanted it to be. Well, what happened was that when I finally got to the point where I was considered cured of both these illnesses, my husband comes to me and asks me for a divorce, to which I was, crushed at the time, but on some level knew that whatever's happening is happening for the greatest good. But I didn't really have an understanding of why this was happening, and it was really kind of tearing me apart inside. So I went to Alexi and we did some past life regression and discovered that we had been together as man and wife in a lifetime during the potato famine in Ireland. And we were married then, very poor, and he was a little bit of a drunkard and a little bit abusive, not anything really bad, but just tinges of it. And one night he had been out drinking, and I was in the barn with a lantern checking on the animals, and he came in a little abusive, and he hit me, and my head hit a beam, and I died. And what we discovered from that is that he had come back in this lifetime to
Help you with.
help me through something else that I was working on from before.
Mhm.
And as soon as that was done, there was no more need for us to be together. And once I felt that, all of a sudden, I had no struggle
Were you
with the
able to share
divorce.
that with him?
Yes.
That's
Yes, I
And
have.
did it fit for him? Did he try
Yeah, it fit for him beautifully, especially probably more so for him because as soon as I was well, he was ready, boom, I was gone.
Sort of leads my thoughts into the next topic, twin souls. A young woman was told that in a recent lifetime in the Civil War that her sweetheart, they had been in Richmond, Virginia, and that they had been engaged, but they postponed getting married because they felt that the South would be victorious, and when it was, they'd get together. Well, it wasn't victorious, and they never did. But he predicted that just at the time when he had lost his life and gone out of her life, he would re-enter in this lifetime. You know, and a lot of things are fated beyond what we can really think. There's a reading I'm going to share with you later that says to the effect of that someone was saying, well, you know, I really want to be in a relationship. What can I do? Well, it was always focus on the ideals that you define what is your own personal spiritual ideal. The one word or so that for you at this time is who you are, whether it's service, love, courage, whatever. And then try to live it in the attitudes you hold toward others and in your actions in your life. And if you do that, what makes relationships succeed, Casey said, and we'll talk more about this with choice and grace, is living up to the ideals that we hold and finding people who look at life out of the same window, where the ideals are complementary. But she was just told that when you do this, when the time is right, he will appear. It's not a thing of going out to trellis and looking. It's going to happen, you know, this kind of a thing.
That's true.
Joe, my husband and I met now at a time in my life I was very tied with my handicapped daughter, and I felt that I just didn't see any opportunity. I was in a dead-end job and in and out of a troubled marriage and stuff, and I thought, well, if anybody's going to enter my life at this point, they're going to have to walk through the front door. I couldn't get out and go anywhere. And so I was plugging away in this real dreary sort of a Saturn return cycle that I was in, and I was teaching a small class on metaphysics, and he walked in the door. So you know, things can happen. I wanted to touch this on twin souls, at least briefly. It's important to our understanding today. How many people here believe in twin souls? Anybody not? It's also said that the right to believe in reincarnation and twin souls has to be earned, and it's earned through many lifetimes. There are people you can go out to Lucky's supermarket and say, do you try to talk somebody into reincarnation and twin souls, and they're not going to believe it if they're not ready to do it and it's not their path. Twin souls is basically the concept, it's been believed by people young and young at heart throughout time that there is an eternal love for us. It's that right lady, one man. Sometimes there are exceptions where it can be, and I'll explain that later, two people of the same sex, but you're of complementary polarities as you were in the beginning of time. I'm sure each of us here at times has wondered and searched for that person that we hear that searching reflected in our songs. You know, the girl of my dreams, the man of my heart, this type of thing. It's a belief that's permeated all cultures. Plato wrote of twin souls. Share with you a little bit of his writing. He said, after the division, the two parts of man, each desiring his other half, came together, longing to grow into one. Each of us, when separated, having one side only, is but the indenture of a man, and he is always looking for his other half or side of himself. When one of them meets the actual half of himself, the pair are lost in an amazement of love and friendship and intimacy, and one will not be out of the other's sight. In the Orient, there's the yin-yang concept, the masculine and feminine principles, balanced in the yin-yang wheel. In Egypt, Isis and Osiris were representative of twin souls. In India, Rama and Sita. In Hebrew, in the biblical creation story, when the Bible talks about the sleep of Adam and the rib being taken out of Adam, if you go back to the original Hebrew, the same word that meant sleep also meant death, and rib meant literally one half or side of a person. So it seems a parable form for this division that Edgar Cayce said took place in earliest times. There are Mexican Indian tablets that talk about this. Colonel James Churchward quotes early ancient Mexican tablets from 1584, it was discovered, I guess. Man was created with a dual principle, male and female. The Creator caused this man to pass into a sleep, and while he slept, the principles were severed by cosmic forces. When man awoke, born again, he was two, man and woman. So, in essence, there's the suggestion throughout culture that we may have started as an androgynous being, both male, female, and one. Not truly a man, not truly a woman, but both. And I was accidentally led to the Rosicrucian Museum by accident, nothing is by chance, the other day, and I found this quote from Hermes Trismegistus, who goes way back. This is a black man who was one of Hermes at the time of Roth in ancient Egypt, post-Atlantean. And he said, again, on the creation of man, he is bisexual as his father, or even God is bisexual. In a sense, God, we in our church frequently refer to God now, and many New Age churches do, as the Father, Mother, God, or God, Goddess, and all that is. The source of life, the Creator, is actually the ultimate twin soul energy, and we're all part of that complementary energy that we experience. And so he touched on that also. When the period was completed, the bond by which all things were held together was loosed by God's design. All living creatures, having till then been bisexual, were parted asunder. So there came to be males and females. And finally, from Edgar Cayce on twin souls. Somebody who was of a... When Edgar Cayce was discoursing on earliest creation times, he said that we were kind of androgynous spiritual beings, and we were full of life and creativity, and we were, in some sense, the guardians of the realm of Earth, but that we fell into the Earth's realm, and we went from the light into experiencing the shadows of self-will and self-creation. And we even made desire creations, supposedly. It's kind of a far-out thought, that if you, for example, if somebody thought of the sculpture of this beautiful winged man, at some point a very part of themselves would go into it, and it would almost come to life. So there was this miscreating, but at some point these souls apparently chose to come in a cycle of reincarnation and to come into true body form. And at that point he said, when there was the turning to the within through the sources of creation, as to make for the helpmeet of that as created by the first cause, or of the creative forces, that, it's archaic language, that brought into being that as was made then from out of self, was brought that as was to be the helpmeet, not just the companion of the body. Despite the archaic language, Edgar Cayce is saying that even Adam, in the separation, each was to be the helpmeet to the other, not just a companion to the body or physical relationship, because they each emerged out of their own selves. They were the complement one to the other. So we talked a little bit about how we're androgynous beings to begin with. Twin souls they're called twin souls, alter ego, soulmates, spiritual affinities, complementary souls. It's thought that they were of masculine and feminine polarity, but it is also true that people, if Louise was a woman, in most of her past lives, she may cross over and be a man in another past life. And Jonathan and David of the Bible, when David said to Jonathan, "I have loved thee as my own soul," it's indicative that there may have been a twin soul relationship. In this lifetime they had chosen a similar embodiment. Twin souls may know many different relationships. They can be father and daughter, mother and son, lovers, sweethearts, friends in that case. They can be together in many different relationships. But whatever relationship it is, you would click. I mean, you are really the answer to each other. If you are twin souls and you're married, you click. You're the best husband or wife you could have, which is not to say you're perfect and that there aren't some problems, because just meeting our twin soul doesn't mean that we become perfect. It doesn't mean if we're self-righteous, we're going to stay, we still have to work out that quality. So we can bring some problems and challenges to each other. But basically, you really click. Famous people in history who searched out the concept of twin souls, probably every creative artist of the last 10 centuries has to some degree or another touched on that sense in their art form of spiritual affinities. Mark Twain was a big advocate of twin souls. Whenever he had a difficult time in his career, he had a series of recurrent dreams. In the dreams, he found himself with a woman who was very familiar to him. In Hawaii, she was shot When they were very much in love, she was shot on a beach with an arrow. In Greece, they had gray threaded through their hair, and they were studying the philosophers together, and so on. And he felt he was dreaming with his twin soul, who in that lifetime he apparently was not with, but may have stayed out of the body as kind of his guardian angel spirit. And I mentioned Marilyn Monroe before. Byron, Goethe, Dante, Swedenborg, all were interested in twin souls. Wagner's opera Tristan and Isolde was the story of twin souls. Elizabeth and Robert Browning, the poets, were twin souls, and quote from them. Elizabeth Barrett Browning speaks of Robert as her other self. Many years after her death, Robert Browning dedicated his one word more to her, and in writing of his longing to be with her again, he penned, "Soul of my soul, I shall clasp thee again, and with God be the rest." So they were very much believing in twin souls, and they wrote a great deal about Greece constantly in their poems. And it's possible they had also been Diana and Apollo, some leaders of mystery schools in Greece. How do you recognize your twin soul? A beautiful reading, a young woman asked this of Edgar Cayce, and he said simply, "The heart knoweth, the soul never forgetteth." You would have similar ideals and kind of telepathy. Your basic work would be very similar, and there would be a general resemblance in body structure and body type. Some people might say that you look enough alike to be brother and sister, which possibly you two do to me. There would be a general similarity. If someone is extremely slender and very dark-haired, and the other person probably would not be a very strong, ample Viking person. There's going to be a similarity of structural type. Telepathy is an indication, as if sometimes you can finish each other's thoughts or each other's sentences.
We do that all the time.
Do you?
Yes.
And there can be emotional telepathy too, sensing each other's moods and feelings, almost as if it's almost like twins in a sense. But this is the twin of the soul, or the complementary soul. Can you be instantly attracted to somebody who is not your twin soul? There is an almost overwhelming physical attraction between twin souls, but yes, you can, unfortunately. Like a woman who went to Cayce and was told, wait. I think it was the same person waiting for the man from the Civil War, was told to wait until her 28th birthday or whatever before she married. But she met an army captain, and she was instantly physically attracted, and she rushed right into marriage. Later, she almost suffered a nervous breakdown with him. She said he was the most attractive, the best-looking boy I'd ever seen. And in addition, somehow he reminded her of her father, too. So there were all these developmental things that were pulling her in the physical, and it turned out not to be the relationship of spirit. If you're not with your twin soul right now, what about that? We talked about the woman from Atlantis who had had so many loves that in this lifetime she needed to experience those loves and make some healing. Even if you're not physically with your twin soul now, you're never separated. So that at night when you sleep, you do journey at times to be with the twin soul. And my teacher knew a couple who got together much later in their life, way up in later middle years. The man was a scholar in Germany, and he had studied the concept of twin souls and really believed in it, praying every day of his life that God would let him meet his twin soul. And he was sent to California in some kind of business. It may have been new electronics or what have you. At the same time, a woman who had cared for her ailing parents until way up in middle age, at the time of their death, took a trip out to visit a sister in Pasadena, California. Before she left, her neighbor wanted her to, for some reason, her neighbor had an impulse to give her this certain dress and this little ruby cross, certain slippers, and she said, I'm much too old, I can't wear those, that's for someone so young. Well, it turned out that at Christmas time, this man from Germany was staying in California, very near the house where the woman was staying with her sister, and she also had longed all her life for a spiritual affinity, but she had given her, karmically, she had to see this thing through with the parents, whether they were children she had abandoned before, and it seemed as if her whole life was devoted to the care of others, and this would never be. And on Christmas Eve, she had an overwhelming impulse to put this dress on, and this slippers, and this cross, and she didn't know why she had to do it. Finally, she couldn't resist the impulse. The sister's husband knew this fellow from Germany and asked him to come over and take Christmas Eve dinner with them. And this occurred just at the point where the man finally had said to God, I'm not going to pray about it anymore. I feel that it's never going to happen. And he had released it. He said, if it's meant to be, it'll be. And so when they met that Christmas Eve night, she coming down the stairway in this dress, it was the same dress that he had, I neglected to say, he had dreamed of a woman in this dress that he would meet, and he had despaired of ever finding her. And they married much later in life, and were very happy. So it's not really to say that there's an absolute time with meeting a soulmate in one's life. Okay, and finally, another example, a couple who are championship golfers talking about how we're not really separated from the twin soul, even through death. This couple, Jack and Virginia, had been married for 25 years in Los Angeles. They were neighbors in an apartment building, my teacher Jessica, and she often, the wife would dream sometimes that they had been together in other times. She seemed to have that sense of knowing. They had no children, and they could stay up literally bothering the neighbors till 2 or 3 in the morning talking about golf games. They never tired. They had the same kind of destiny, the same work, the same basic interests, and they were the complement to each other in every way. When he passed away, she remained in the apartment, and my teacher Jessica was coming home one day. She was very psychically gifted, and she looked upstairs at the balcony. This is in the afternoon, and she saw Jack, who was dead, standing on the balcony waving to her. And then it seemed to disappear. She rushed upstairs to tell Virginia, to knock on the door and tell her about it. Virginia had been asleep on the couch. She woke up and said she'd been dreaming of Jack, that he was with her, and that they would never really be separated. So even in death, Edgar Cayce said love goes far beyond what we call the grave. In death, twin souls are not separated.